The helicopter blades chopped through the midnight air as Sarah Martinez gripped her rifle, her heart pounding against her tactical vest. Below, the dark waters of the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly. In 12 hours, she would either make history or wash out of the most brutal military training program ever created. "You don't belong here," the instructor had sneered just weeks earlier, his voice cutting through the California dawn. "This isn't a place for someone like you." But Sarah had heard those words before. Growing up in a cramped apartment in East Los Angeles, she'd been told she didn't belong in advanced classes, didn't belong at the university where she earned her engineering degree, and certainly didn't belong attempting what no woman had ever accomplished in the history of the U.S. Navy SEALs. What her critics didn't know was that being underestimated had become her greatest weapon. Every doubt thrown her way had forged steel in her spine. Every barrier placed before her had taught her to find another way around, over, or through it. As the helicopter descended toward the training compound, Sarah thought about the phone call she'd made to her grandmother the night before. In broken English mixed with Spanish, the elderly woman had whispered, "Mija, they don't know what fire burns inside you. Show them." The fire had been burning for 26 years, fueled by every person who'd looked at her small frame, her quiet demeanor, her background, and decided she wasn't enough. Tonight, that fire would either consume her dreams or illuminate a path no woman had ever walked. The story of how Sarah Martinez would shatter every preconception about strength, endurance, and belonging was about to begin. But first, she had to survive what would become the most documented and controversial SEAL training cycle in modern military history. Sarah Elena Martinez wasn't supposed to amount to anything special. Born in a two-bedroom apartment in East Los Angeles to a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night, she learned early that the world had already written her story. It was a story of limitations, of settling, of knowing your place and staying in it. Her mother, Carmen, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and rent paid. Before school, Sarah would watch her mother's tired eyes scan the bills scattered across their small kitchen table, watching her lips move silently as she calculated which ones could wait another week. The apartment was always filled with the sound of her younger brother's cartoons and the smell of rice and beans that stretched for days. At 5 years old, Sarah discovered something that would shape the rest of her life. While other children played with toys, she found herself drawn to taking things apart and putting them back together. Her mother's old radio became her first project. When Carmen found Sarah surrounded by tiny metal pieces and springs, she expected tears and a broken radio. Instead, she found her daughter carefully reassembling the device with the focused intensity of a surgeon. The radio crackled to life, clearer than it had sounded in months. "¿Cómo hiciste eso?" Carmen asked, staring at her small daughter. Sarah shrugged, unable to explain the pictures that formed in her mind when she looked at mechanical things. She could see how pieces fit together, how energy flowed through circuits, how force moved through systems. It was like reading, but with her hands and her imagination instead of her eyes. School presented its own challenges. At Jefferson Elementary, Sarah quickly discovered that being smart and poor was a complicated combination. Her teachers praised her test scores, but worried about her future. Guidance counselors spoke in gentle, condescending tones about realistic expectations and practical career paths. They saw a bright Latina girl from the wrong zip code and assumed they knew how her story would end. But Sarah's mind worked differently than they expected. While other students struggled with basic math, she was designing paper airplanes that could fly farther and stay aloft longer than anything her classmates could create. During recess, she would find discarded items and build small machines that fascinated and puzzled other children. Her 4th-grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was the first adult to recognize that Sarah's mind was exceptional. After watching Sarah solve a complex word problem in 3 different ways during a single class period, Mrs. Rodriguez stayed after school to talk with her. "Sarah, what do you want to be when you grow up?" she asked. "I want to build things that help people," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Important things. Things that matter." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "Have you ever heard of engineers?" Sarah hadn't, but Mrs. Rodriguez spent the next hour showing her pictures and videos of bridges, rockets, computers, and medical devices. She explained how engineers solved problems and created solutions that changed the world. For the first time, Sarah saw a future that matched the images in her imagination. But Mrs. Rodriguez also had to be honest. "Sarah, if you want to be an engineer, you'll have to work harder than anyone else." People will tell you that girls like you don't become engineers. They'll say you're not smart enough, not strong enough, not the right kind of person. You'll have to prove them wrong every single day. Sarah listened carefully, processing this information like data. Then, she asked, what if I like proving people wrong? That question revealed something fundamental about Sarah's character. She didn't just accept challenges, she was drawn to them. The bigger the obstacle, the more interesting it became to her systematic mind. If other people saw barriers, Sarah saw engineering problems waiting for creative solutions. Middle school brought new challenges. At Roosevelt Middle School, Sarah encountered teachers who had lower expectations for students from her neighborhood. Her math teacher, Mr. Peterson, regularly called on other students to answer difficult questions, even when Sarah's hand was raised. When she scored perfectly on a standardized test, he questioned whether she had received extra help. Instead of becoming discouraged, Sarah developed a strategy. She began staying after school to work on extra problems, documenting her methods and solutions in careful detail. She created a notebook filled with mathematical proofs and engineering sketches. When Mr. Peterson finally called on her to solve a problem at the board, she didn't just provide the answer. She explained 3 different solution methods and showed how the problem could be extended to real-world applications. The classroom fell silent. Mr. Peterson stared at the board, then at Sarah, then back at the board. From that day forward, he treated her differently. Not because he suddenly believed in her, but because she had made it impossible for him to ignore her capabilities. At home, things were becoming more difficult. Carmen was working longer hours as the cost of living increased, and Sarah found herself responsible for her younger brother's homework and meals. Many evenings, she would help him with his assignments while completing her own advanced coursework by lamplight. One night, while Sarah worked on a physics problem at the kitchen table, her brother asked, "Why do you work so hard? Nobody expects you to be smart." Sarah looked up from her notebook. At 14, she was already taller than her mother, but still small for her age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were hand-me-downs from cousins. She looked like countless other girls from their neighborhood. "Maybe that's exactly why I need to be," she replied. High school at Lincoln High brought opportunities Sarah had never imagined. The school had recently received a grant for a new engineering program, complete with computer labs and design software. For the first time, Sarah had access to tools that matched her ambitions. Her physics teacher, Mr. Kim, was a former aerospace engineer who had left the industry to teach. He recognized Sarah's unusual combination of theoretical understanding and practical intuition. While other students struggled to visualize how equations translated to real-world phenomena, Sarah could look at a formula and immediately see the physical principles it described. "Sarah," Mr. Kim said after class one day, "have you considered applying to engineering schools?" The suggestion seemed absurd. Students from Lincoln High didn't go to elite universities. They went to community colleges, if they went to college at all. But Mr. Kim persisted. He stayed after school to help Sarah prepare for advanced placement exams. He wrote letters of recommendation that detailed her exceptional problem-solving abilities. Most importantly, he helped her understand that her background wasn't a limitation, it was a source of unique perspective. "Engineers solve problems," he explained. "You've been solving problems your entire life. The fact that you've had to be creative with limited resources makes you a better engineer, not a worse one." Sarah's senior project became the talk of the school. She designed and built a water filtration system using readily available materials that could provide clean drinking water for families in developing countries. The system was elegant in its simplicity and powerful in its effectiveness. When she presented it to a panel of judges from local universities, they were stunned by both the innovation and the sophisticated understanding of engineering principles it demonstrated. One judge, Dr. Patricia Hendricks from UCLA, approached Sarah after the presentation. "Where did you learn to think about systems integration at this level?" she asked. Sarah considered the question. "I guess I learned it from being poor," she said finally. "When you don't have much, you have to make everything work together perfectly." Dr. Hendricks smiled. "That's one of the most insightful things I've ever heard an engineering student say. Have you applied to UCLA?" Sarah hadn't. The application fees alone were more than her family could afford, and the idea of attending a prestigious university seemed like fantasy. But Dr. Hendricks wasn't just making conversation. She was offering Sarah something that would change the trajectory of her life. 3 months later, Sarah received a full scholarship to UCLA's engineering program. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while she was helping her brother with homework. Carmen was at work, so Sarah was alone when she opened the envelope. She read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. Full tuition, room, and board. For years at one of the country's top engineering schools. A chance to prove that intelligence and determination mattered more than zip codes and bank account balances. When Carmen came home that night, exhausted from a double shift, she found Sarah sitting quietly at the kitchen table with the letter spread before her. ¿Qué pasó, mija? Carmen asked, concerned by her daughter's unusual stillness. Sarah handed her the letter. Carmen's English wasn't perfect, but she understood enough. Her hands began to shake as she realized what the letter meant. Ukla, Carmen whispered. My baby is going to UCLA. For the first time in years, Carmen cried in front of her children. But these weren't tears of exhaustion or frustration. These were tears of pride and possibility. That night, as Sarah lay in her small bed listening to the sounds of her neighborhood, she thought about the journey ahead. UCLA would bring new challenges, new people who would underestimate her, new barriers to overcome. But she was ready. She had spent 18 years learning that the world's opinion of her limitations was irrelevant. What mattered was her ability to see solutions where others saw problems, to find strength where others saw weakness, to keep moving forward when others expected her to quit. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah didn't know that her path would eventually lead her far from engineering labs and lecture halls. She didn't know that the same problem-solving skills and relentless determination that had earned her a scholarship would eventually draw her to one of the most challenging pursuits in the world. She only knew that tomorrow would bring new problems to solve, new people to prove wrong, and new opportunities to show that being underestimated was not a disadvantage. It was fuel that UCLA's engineering campus was a world away from East Los Angeles, though it was only 30 minutes by car. Walking across the pristine quad for the first time, Sarah felt like an explorer on an alien planet. Students lounged on perfectly maintained lawns, their expensive laptops gleaming in the California sun. Conversations floated around her in the casual confidence of people who had never doubted they belonged in places like this. Sarah's dorm room was smaller than her bedroom at home, but it was hers alone for the first time in her life. Her roommate, Jennifer, was from Orange County. Her father was a patent attorney, her mother was a doctor, and she spoke about engineering school as if it were a natural stepping stone rather than an impossible dream achieved. So what's your dad do? Jennifer asked while unpacking designer clothes into the tiny closet. I don't have a father, Sarah replied simply, focusing on organizing her few possessions. Oh, Jennifer's voice carried that particular tone of discomfort that privileged people use when confronted with realities they've never considered. What about your mom? She cleans office buildings. The conversation died there, and Sarah understood that she would need to navigate social dynamics as carefully as she approached engineering problems. She wasn't bitter about the differences between her background and her classmates. She was simply gathering data about the environment she needed to succeed in. Her first engineering class was calculus-based physics with Professor Williams, a stern woman in her 60s who had earned her PhD when female engineers were even rarer than they were now. The lecture hall held 300 students, and Sarah quickly noticed she was one of only 20 women present. She was also one of the very few students of color. Professor Williams began with a warning. Look around you, she said, her voice carrying easily through the large room. 60% of you will change majors before graduation. 40% of those who remain will graduate with grades that make them unemployable in competitive engineering fields. This is not because engineering is inherently difficult, but because it requires a level of persistence that most people cannot sustain. Sarah looked around the room, studying her classmates' faces. Some looked worried. Others seemed dismissive. A few appeared confident. Sarah felt something different entirely. She felt curious about which category she would fall into, and determined to find out. The coursework was challenging, but not in ways Sarah hadn't expected. The mathematical concepts built logically on each other, and the physics principles aligned with her intuitive understanding of how things worked. What surprised her was how many of her classmates struggled with basic problem-solving approaches that seemed obvious to her. During study groups, Sarah watched her peers panic when faced with unfamiliar problem types. They had memorized formulas and procedures, but they couldn't adapt when problems required creative thinking. Sarah, who had spent years figuring out how to make things work with whatever resources were available, approached each new challenge systematically. How do you always know where to start? Asked Michael, a classmate who had scored perfectly on the SAT, but consistently struggled with homework problems. Sarah considered the question. I guess I look for what I can control, she said. Then, I figure out what information I need to control what I want to change. Michael stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. For him, physics was about memorizing the right equation for each situation. For Sarah, physics was about understanding the underlying principles that governed how the world worked. Her professors began to notice her unusual approach to problem-solving. Dr. Martinez, her thermodynamics professor, was particularly impressed by Sarah's midterm exam. While other students had solved problems using standard techniques, Sarah had developed more efficient methods that demonstrated deeper understanding. "Sarah, could you stay after class?" Dr. Martinez asked one afternoon. Sarah gathered her notebook, wondering if she had made some mistake. But when she approached the lectern, Dr. Martinez was smiling. "I've been teaching for 15 years, he said, "and I've never seen a student develop original solution methods during an exam. Where did you learn to think about heat transfer in terms of system optimization?" Sarah wasn't sure how to answer. She hadn't learned it anywhere specific. She had simply looked at the problems and seen more efficient paths to solutions. "I think about what would happen if I had to solve this problem with limited resources," she said finally. "Like, if I only had basic tools and materials, how would I make it work?" Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "That's engineering intuition. Some people develop it after years of practice. Others, like you, seem to be born with it." As her sophomore year progressed, Sarah began to stand out not just for her grades, but for her approach to learning. She didn't just want to understand how to solve textbook problems. She wanted to understand how engineering principles applied to real-world challenges. She spent hours in the lab, often staying long after other students had left. She volunteered for research projects that other students avoided because they required too much time or involved too much uncertainty. She began working with Dr. Chun on a project involving water purification systems for disaster relief. "Why are you interested in this particular application?" Dr. Chun asked during their first meeting. "Because it matters," Sarah replied. "There are people who need clean water, and engineering can solve that problem. I want to work on problems that actually help people." Dr. Chun smiled. "That's admirable. But you should know that this kind of work is difficult to commercialize. Most of our top students focus on projects that lead to high-paying jobs in established industries." Sarah considered this information. She understood that her classmates were thinking strategically about their careers. Many came from families where financial security was already established, so they could pursue prestigious positions without worry. Sarah's situation was different, but her priorities were also different. "I've been poor my whole life," she said. "I know how to live on less money. What I don't know how to live with is working on things that don't matter." That project would become Sarah's introduction to a different way of thinking about engineering. Instead of solving theoretical problems in controlled laboratory conditions, she was working on systems that needed to function reliably in unpredictable environments. The constraints were more complex, the stakes were higher, and the satisfaction of success was deeper. During her junior year, Sarah's reputation on campus began to shift. She was no longer just the quiet scholarship student from East LA. She was becoming known as someone who could solve problems that stumped other students, and even some professors. Study groups specifically requested her participation. Research supervisors competed for her assistance on challenging projects. But success brought its own complications. Some classmates became resentful of her achievements, suggesting that her scholarship status gave her unfair advantages or that her background made professors more lenient with her work. Sarah learned to navigate these social dynamics with the same systematic approach she used for engineering problems. She also began to notice something troubling in her field. Engineering solutions were elegant and sophisticated, but they often required resources and infrastructure that weren't available in places where they were needed most. The communities that faced the biggest challenges were often the least equipped to implement the most advanced solutions. "It's like we're designing for people who already have everything they need," Sarah confided to Dr. Chen one afternoon while reviewing test results from their latest filtration prototype. "That's an astute observation," Dr. Chen replied. "It's also one of the biggest challenges in appropriate technology. How do you create sophisticated solutions using simple tools and limited resources?" The question became central to Sarah's thinking about her future career. She wanted to work on problems that mattered, but she also wanted to ensure her solutions could actually be implemented where they were needed. During the spring of her junior year, everything changed. Sarah was walking across campus after a late night in the lab when she noticed a crowd gathered around the student center. A military recruiter was giving a presentation about engineering opportunities in the Navy. Normally, Sarah would have walked past without stopping. Military service had never been part of her plans. But something about the presentation caught her attention. The recruiter, a naval officer named Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, was describing engineering challenges that went far beyond anything Sarah had encountered in school. She talked about designing systems that needed to work perfectly in extreme environments, under intense pressure, with lives depending on their reliability. "We need engineers who can think creatively under impossible constraints," Lieutenant Commander Hayes was saying. "Engineers who can solve problems with limited resources and unlimited consequences." After the presentation, Sarah found herself approaching the recruiter's table. "What kind of engineering problems are you talking about?" she asked. Lieutenant Commander Hayes studied Sarah carefully. Everything from submarine propulsion systems that operate at crushing depths to communication equipment that needs to function during combat operations. The kind of engineering where failure isn't just disappointing, it's catastrophic. Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of what engineering could be. These weren't academic exercises or commercial products. These were life and death applications where her problem-solving skills could have immediate and meaningful impact. "What would the training involve?" she asked. "That depends on what rate you choose," Lieutenant Commander Hayes explained. "For someone with your background, you could go directly into officer training and specialize in systems engineering. But if you really want to understand how these systems work under pressure, you might consider more specialized training." She handed Sarah a brochure that would change everything. "Have you ever heard of Navy SEALs?" Sarah hadn't, beyond vague references in movies. Lieutenant Commander Hayes explained that SEALs were special operations forces who worked in marine environments. They needed to understand and maintain complex technical systems while operating in conditions that would destroy most equipment. "We don't currently have women in SEAL teams," Lieutenant Commander Hayes continued. "But the policy is being reviewed. Someone with your engineering background and problem-solving abilities might be exactly what we need when that changes." That night, Sarah researched everything she could find about Navy SEAL training and operations. What she discovered was both terrifying and fascinating. The physical demands were extraordinary. The psychological pressure was intense. The failure rate was overwhelming. But the engineering challenges were unlike anything else in the world. SEALs worked with advanced weapons systems, underwater propulsion devices, communications equipment, and navigation tools in environments that pushed both human beings and technology to their absolute limits. They needed to understand not just how to use these systems, but how to repair and modify them under field conditions where improvisation could mean the difference between mission success and mission failure. For Sarah, it wasn't just about the technical aspects. It was about the application of engineering principles in service of something larger than herself. The problems were real, the stakes were ultimate, and the constraints required exactly the kind of creative problem-solving that had always energized her. She spent the rest of her junior year researching and preparing. She learned everything she could about military engineering applications. She began a fitness regimen that pushed her beyond anything she had previously attempted. Most importantly, she began to understand that her engineering education had been preparing her for challenges she had never imagined. When she told her family about her decision to join the Navy after graduation, their reactions were mixed. "Mija, you don't need to fight anybody," Carmen said, worry evident in her voice. "You're going to be an engineer. You can have a good life, a safe life." "I want to use my engineering to help people," Sarah explained. "This is how I can do that in a way that really matters." Her brother was more direct. "You know they don't let girls be SEALs, right?" "Not yet," Sarah replied. "But policies change. And when they do, I want to be ready." As her senior year began, Sarah was preparing for two different futures simultaneously. She was completing her engineering degree with the highest honors, while also training her body and mind for military challenges that most people couldn't imagine surviving. She didn't know that her decision would eventually lead to her becoming part of the most watched and documented military training program in history. She only knew that she had found a path that aligned her engineering skills with her desire to solve problems that truly mattered. The girl who had grown up taking apart radios in East Los Angeles was preparing to engineer solutions in the most demanding environments on Earth. Sarah graduated summa cum laude from UCLA with a degree in mechanical engineering and a commission as an ensign in the United States Navy. The ceremony took place on a bright June morning, with Carmen sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter receive recognition for academic excellence that few students in the program's history had achieved. But Sarah's mind was already focused on the next challenge. 3 weeks after graduation, she would report to Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island. After that, if everything went according to plan, She would begin a journey that would test every assumption about human potential and military tradition. The policy change had come through 6 months earlier. For the first time in the history of the U.S. Navy, women would be allowed to attempt SEAL training. The announcement had generated enormous controversy and intense media attention. Critics argued that the physical standards were insurmountable for women. Supporters countered that competence, not gender, should determine military roles. Sarah followed the debate with analytical interest rather than emotional investment. She understood that she would be part of a historic experiment, but she approached it like any other engineering challenge. There was a problem to solve. Could she meet the standards required for SEAL qualification? The only way to find out was through systematic preparation and rigorous testing. Officer Candidate School was Sarah's first experience with military training, and it revealed gaps in her preparation she hadn't anticipated. The physical demands were significant, but manageable. The academic requirements were straightforward for someone with her educational background. But the psychological aspects of military training required adaptation. Everything in OCS was designed to test candidates' ability to perform under pressure, follow orders precisely, and maintain composure during controlled chaos. For someone who had spent 4 years learning to think independently and question assumptions, the adjustment to military discipline was challenging. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, her company's lead instructor, noticed Sarah's struggle during the first week. "Martinez, you thinking too much," he said after watching her hesitate during a drill that required immediate response to commands. "In the fleet, hesitation gets people killed. You understand the concept intellectually, but you're not implementing it operationally." Sarah recognized the feedback as accurate. She had been analyzing each command rather than simply executing it. That evening, she developed a mental framework for temporarily suspending her analytical processes during training exercises. She would think like an engineer when the situation required engineering thinking, and like a sailor when the situation required sailor thinking. The adaptation worked. By the end of OCS, Sarah was performing at the top of her class in all categories. Her company commander, Lieutenant Commander Stevens, was impressed by her ability to absorb correction and implement changes immediately. "Martinez, what's your next assignment?" he asked during their final evaluation meeting. "I'm requesting basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, sir," Sarah replied. Lieutenant Commander Stevens paused. He had heard about the policy change, but Sarah was the first female officer he had encountered who was actually pursuing SEAL qualification. "Are you aware of the success rates for BUD/S?" he asked. "Approximately 25% overall completion rate, sir. Higher for officers, lower for enlisted personnel. No statistical data available for female candidates. Are you aware of the physical standards?" "Yes, sir. I've been training for 18 months to exceed the minimum requirements." Lieutenant Commander Stevens studied her carefully. Sarah's OCS performance had been exemplary, but BUD/S was different. It wasn't just about meeting standards. It was about surviving a training program deliberately designed to push people beyond their breaking points. "Why SEALs, Martinez? With your engineering background, you could have a successful career in submarines, surface warfare, or naval aviation." Sarah had been asked this question many times over the past year. Her answer had evolved, but the core reasoning remained constant. "Sir, I want to work on problems where engineering precision matters most. SEAL operations require technical systems to function perfectly in the most challenging environments possible. I believe my engineering background, combined with special operations training, would allow me to contribute to capabilities that could save lives and accomplish missions that matter." It was a thoughtful answer, and Lieutenant Commander Stevens could see that Sarah had considered the decision carefully. But he also felt obligated to be honest about what she was attempting. "Martinez, BUD/S isn't just physically demanding. It's psychologically brutal. The instructors will target you specifically because you're female. The media attention will be intense. You'll be carrying the weight of everyone's opinions about women in combat. Are you prepared for that level of pressure?" "Sir, I've been carrying other people's expectations my entire life. The pressure of representing all women in the military doesn't seem fundamentally different from the pressure of representing all poor students at UCLA or all Latina engineers in my program." Sarah reported to Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, on a Monday morning in September. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the training compound, its waves providing a constant soundtrack that would define the next 6 months of her life. She was one of 180 candidates beginning BUD/S Class 247. She was the only woman. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Reporters camped outside the base gates. News programs ran special segments analyzing her background and prospects. Online forums debated whether she would last a day, a week, or make it through the entire program. Sarah ignored all of it. She had learned from her UCLA experience that external opinions were irrelevant data points. The only metrics that mattered were the standards she needed to meet and her own performance against those standards. Her first challenge came during the initial physical screening test. All candidates needed to pass minimum requirements in push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a timed run before training could begin. Sarah had been preparing for this moment for over a year, but standing on the beach at dawn with 179 male candidates, she felt the weight of the moment. The push-up test came first. Sarah needed 50 push-ups in 2 minutes. She completed 78 with perfect form. The sit-up test required 50 repetitions. She completed 85. The pull-up test required 10. She completed 18. The 4-mile run was her biggest concern. She needed to complete it in 31 minutes. Sarah had consistently run it in 28 minutes during training, but she had never run it while being watched by dozens of instructors, fellow candidates, and media representatives documenting every step. As she crossed the finish line at 26:42, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before. She had not just met a standard. She had exceeded it by a significant margin while under the most intense scrutiny of her life. For the first time, she began to believe that her goal might actually be achievable. But passing the initial screening was just the beginning. The real training hadn't started yet. Bud/S was divided into 3 phases. First phase focused on conditioning and basic seamanship. Second phase covered diving and underwater operations. Third phase addressed land warfare and tactics. Each phase included specific training designed to eliminate candidates who couldn't maintain standards under increasing pressure. The most notorious part of first phase was Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. Candidates were required to participate in beach runs, ocean swims, boat carries, and obstacle courses while instructors subjected them to constant psychological pressure designed to induce voluntary withdrawal. Sarah's approach to Hell Week was methodical. She had studied accounts from previous BUD/S classes and identified the factors that most commonly led to candidates quitting. Physical exhaustion was significant, but mental fatigue was more decisive. Candidates who lost focus on their motivation or began dwelling on discomfort were more likely to ring the bell that signaled withdrawal from training. She developed specific mental techniques for maintaining focus during extended stress. When physical discomfort became intense, she would shift her attention to engineering problems she had solved in college. When instructors subjected her to verbal harassment designed to undermine her confidence, she would analyze their techniques as data about psychological pressure rather than personal attacks. The strategy worked, but not without cost. By the 3rd day of Hell Week, Sarah was experiencing levels of exhaustion she had never imagined possible. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache. Salt water had created painful sores wherever her equipment rubbed against her skin. Her hands were so swollen from cold water exposure that she could barely grip her paddle during boat exercises. But she was still there. And, more importantly, she was still performing. On Thursday night, during what would become the most physically demanding evolution of Hell Week, Sarah's training partner collapsed during a boat carry exercise. The candidate, a former college football player who outweighed Sarah by 80 pounds, simply stopped moving and sat down in the sand. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "I'm done." Sarah looked at her partner. Then, at the boat they were required to carry over their heads for another mile. The logical decision would be to find a new partner among the remaining candidates. But something about the moment, the exhaustion, the cold, the impossible distance still to cover, crystallized her understanding of why she was there. "You don't have to do this anymore," she told her partner. "But I do. And if you help me finish this carry, I'll help you finish Hell Week." For the next hour, Sarah essentially carried both her partner and her share of the boat. She used techniques from her engineering training to distribute weight more efficiently. She talked constantly, helping her partner maintain focus on small, achievable goals rather than the overwhelming scope of what remained. They finished the evolution. Her partner completed Hell Week, and Sarah learned something about leadership that no textbook had taught her. When Hell Week ended, 47 candidates remained from the original 180. Sarah was one of them. But, more importantly, she had established something that would define the rest of her training. She wasn't just surviving BUD/S. She was excelling in ways that surprised her instructors and inspired her fellow candidates. As second phase began, with its focus on underwater operations and diving physiology, Sarah discovered that her analytical mind gave her significant advantages. She understood the physics of underwater pressure effects more intuitively than most candidates. She could troubleshoot equipment problems more efficiently than students with more diving experience. But she also learned that technical competence alone wasn't sufficient. SEAL training was designed to create operators who could function effectively under conditions that degraded both physical and cognitive performance. Understanding the theory of underwater operations was different from executing those operations while hypoxic, hypothermic, and exhausted. During one particularly challenging evolution, candidates were required to complete underwater knot-tying exercises while instructors actively harassed them and disrupted their equipment. The exercise was designed to simulate the kind of multitasking required during actual operations, where technical precision needed to be maintained despite external stressors. Sarah approached the exercise systematically, developing techniques for maintaining focus on manual tasks while processing multiple competing demands for attention. She completed the exercise faster than any other candidate in her class, using methods that her instructors had never seen before. After the evolution, her diving instructor, Senior Chief Martinez, asked to speak with her privately. "Martinez, where did you learn to compartmentalize stress like that?" he asked. Sarah considered the question. "I think I learned it from being poor, Senior Chief. When you don't have enough resources to solve all your problems, you learn to focus completely on one problem at a time while keeping track of all the other problems that need attention." Senior Chief Martinez nodded slowly. "That's one of the best explanations of operational focus I've ever heard. Most people take years to develop that kind of mental discipline." As second phase progressed, Sarah continued to set performance standards that impressed her instructors. But she was also learning lessons about teamwork and leadership that extended beyond technical competence. SEAL operations required individuals who could perform at elite levels while supporting teammates who might be struggling. Excellence was important, but excellence combined with the ability to elevate others was essential. By the end of second phase, Sarah had not just proven she could meet SEAL standards, she had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded those of most male candidates. Her performance was being documented and studied by military researchers interested in understanding how gender integration might affect special operations training. But Sarah was only halfway through BUD/S. Third phase, with its focus on land warfare and weapons training, would present challenges that tested different aspects of preparation and determination. And beyond BUD/S lay SEAL qualification training, where the real preparation for operational deployment would begin. Standing on the beach at Coronado as second phase concluded, watching the sun set over the Pacific, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. The girl who had grown up taking apart radios in East Los Angeles was now preparing for the final phase of training that would make her the first female Navy SEAL in history. She had proven that she belonged here. Now she needed to prove she could excel here in ways that would open doors for the women who would follow her path. Third phase of BUD/S brought Sarah into a world where engineering precision met lethal application. The training shifted from basic physical conditioning and swimming skills to advanced weapons systems, tactical communications, and combat engineering. For the first time since beginning SEAL training, Sarah felt completely in her element. The phase began with demolitions training, where candidates learned to calculate explosive charges for destroying enemy infrastructure. While other students struggled with the mathematical relationships between explosive materials, target composition, and desired effects, Sarah approached each problem like the engineering challenges she had mastered in college. "Martinez, explain your calculation method," Instructor Chief Thompson said after reviewing Sarah's solution to a particularly complex demolition problem. Sarah walked to the whiteboard and began drawing diagrams that illustrated force vectors, material stress points, and energy distribution patterns. Her explanation went beyond the required formulas to demonstrate underlying physical principles that governed explosive effects. "Most students memorize the standard charges for typical targets," she explained. "But every target is different. If you understand the physics, you can adapt to any situation with maximum efficiency and minimum resources." Chief Thompson studied her work. "Martinez, where did you learn to think about explosives in terms of materials engineering?" "I applied the same principles I used for mechanical stress analysis in college, Chief. Explosives are just another form of applied force with specific energy characteristics. The other candidates in the class stopped working on their own problems to listen to Sarah's explanation. Her approach was not only more sophisticated than what they had been taught, it was more practical for field applications where standard solutions might not be available. That pattern repeated throughout third phase. When the class moved to advanced weapons systems, Sarah demonstrated an intuitive understanding of ballistics that impressed her marksmanship instructors. When they studied tactical communications, she quickly mastered complex radio equipment and even suggested modifications that improved reliability under field conditions. But third phase also introduced challenges that tested aspects of SEAL training beyond technical competence. Combat tactics required instantaneous decision-making under extreme stress. Leadership exercises demanded the ability to motivate exhausted teammates while executing complex missions with incomplete information. During one-night training exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a simulated enemy compound, gathering intelligence, and extracting without detection. The mission required precise coordination between 6 team members operating in complete darkness with minimal communication. 20 minutes into the exercise, their team leader was designated as a casualty by the training cadre. Sarah, as the next senior team member, found herself responsible for completing the mission with reduced personnel and no time to develop a new plan. Standing in the darkness, with 5 teammates looking to her for direction and instructors monitoring their every move, Sarah felt a moment of doubt that surprised her. Throughout BUD/S, she had excelled at every individual challenge. But leadership under pressure was different. Other people's success or failure now depended on her decisions. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, using a technique she had developed for processing complex information quickly. The mission parameters, available resources, and teammate capabilities aligned in her mind like components in an engineering system. Rodriguez, you take point with night vision. Williams and Chun, your security. Johnson, your communications. Patterson, you're with me on intel collection, she whispered. We adapt the original plan by consolidating roles and using multiple extraction routes depending on what we find. The modified plan worked perfectly. Sarah's team completed their mission faster than any other team in the exercise, while maintaining complete stealth and gathering more intelligence than their instructors had expected possible. After the exercise, the training cadre conducted a detailed debrief that would become part of the official documentation of women's performance in SEAL training. Martinez, walk us through your decision-making process when you assumed leadership, said Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the exercise evaluator. Sarah described her analytical approach to assessing the situation, but Lieutenant Commander Hayes pushed for more detail. You had less than 30 seconds to reorganize a 6-person team and modify a complex mission plan. How did you process all those variables so quickly? Sarah considered the question. Ma'am, I think I approached it like debugging a complex system. When part of an engineered system fails, you have to quickly identify what functions are still operational, what capabilities you've lost, and how to reroute processes to maintain system performance. Lieutenant Commander Hayes made careful notes. So you applied engineering problem-solving methodology to tactical leadership? I guess so, ma'am. I hadn't thought about it that way, but the cognitive processes are similar. That debrief would later be referenced in military studies about cognitive approaches to special operations training. But, at the time, Sarah was focused on the immediate challenge of completing third phase and earning her SEAL qualification. As third phase progressed, Sarah's reputation within the training command began to shift. She was no longer seen as a social experiment or a symbol of changing military policy. She had become recognized as an exceptional candidate who happened to be female, rather than a female candidate who was attempting to meet male standards. Her performance metrics supported that assessment. Sarah consistently scored in the top 5% of all candidates across every category of evaluation. Her physical fitness scores exceeded minimum requirements by significant margins. Her technical proficiency was rated as exceptional by all instructors. Most importantly, her leadership evaluations indicated potential for advancement to senior positions within the SEAL community. But success in training brought new forms of pressure. Media attention intensified as Sarah approached graduation. Military researchers documented every aspect of her performance for future policy analysis. Politicians and advocacy groups used her progress to support arguments about gender integration in combat roles. Sarah maintained the same approach she had used throughout her military career: focus on controllable variables and ignore external noise. But the weight of representation was becoming more difficult to manage. During the final week of third phase, she received a phone call that put everything in perspective. "Mija, I saw you on the news," Carmen said, her voice filled with pride and worry. "They say you're going to be the first woman to become a Navy SEAL." "If I graduate, yes," Sarah replied carefully. "But I haven't graduated yet." "Are you scared?" Carmen asked. Sarah considered the question honestly. "No, I'm not scared of the training. But I'm worried about what happens after. Everyone is watching to see if I succeed or fail. If I succeed, it opens doors for other women. If I fail, it might close them." Carmen was quiet for a moment. Then, she said something that Sarah would remember for the rest of her career. "Sarah, you spent your whole life worrying about what other people needed you to prove. Maybe it's time to focus on what you want to accomplish." That conversation helped Sarah reframe her understanding of the pressure she was experiencing. She had been approaching SEAL training as if her success was primarily about representing other women. But her original motivation had been personal. She wanted to apply her engineering skills to challenges that mattered. Everything else was secondary. The final exercise of third phase was a comprehensive test that combined all the skills candidates had learned throughout BUD/S. Teams were required to complete a mission that included underwater infiltration, reconnaissance, demolitions, weapons employment, and extraction over a 36-hour period with minimal rest and constant pressure from instructors. Sarah's team was assigned a particularly complex scenario that required them to destroy a simulated enemy communications facility while gathering intelligence about defensive capabilities. The mission required precise coordination between diving operations, explosive placement, and tactical movement through defended terrain. During the planning phase, Sarah's teammates naturally looked to her for technical guidance on the demolitions calculations and underwater approach routes. But when it came time to designate team leadership roles, they chose someone else. "No offense, Martinez," said Peterson, the team member selected as leader. "But this mission is about combat operations, not engineering problems." Sarah felt a flash of anger that surprised her. Throughout BUD/S, she had been accepted as an equal in most situations. But when the stakes were highest, her teammates still defaulted to traditional assumptions about leadership and combat capability. "None taken," she replied calmly. But, privately, she decided that her performance during the exercise would demonstrate capabilities that went beyond technical competence. The mission began with a 2-mile underwater swim to reach the target area. Sarah had calculated the optimal approach route and timing, but Peterson made modifications to the plan that she knew would create unnecessary complications. "Sir, the tide tables indicate that your route will put us in a cross-current that will add 40 minutes to our transit time," Sarah said during the final briefing. "I've reviewed the calculations," Peterson replied. "We'll proceed as planned." During the swim, everything unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted. The team fell behind schedule, arrival at the target area during daylight rather than under cover of darkness. Peterson had to make real-time modifications to the plan that put the entire team at greater risk. But instead of highlighting the errors in Peterson's planning, Sarah adapted seamlessly to the changing situation. She recalculated explosive charges to account for the modified timeline. She identified alternative extraction routes when their original plan became compromised. Most importantly, she provided the technical expertise that allowed the team to complete their mission successfully despite the complications. During the post-exercise debrief, the instructors focused on the team's ability to adapt to unexpected challenges. "Martinez, you provided technical support throughout this exercise, but you also demonstrated leadership capabilities when the mission parameters changed," said Master Chief Rodriguez. "Why didn't you request a leadership role during planning?" Sarah looked around the room at her teammates, all of whom were listening intently to her answer. "Master Chief, successful teams use everyone's capabilities most effectively. My role was to provide technical expertise and adaptive problem-solving. Peterson's role was to make leadership decisions under pressure. The mission succeeded because everyone contributed their strengths." It was a diplomatic answer, but Master Chief Rodriguez pressed further. "Martinez, do you think you could have led this mission more effectively?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Master Chief, I think I could have led this mission differently. Whether that would have been more effective is something the team would have to evaluate." After the debrief, Peterson approached Sarah privately. "Martinez, you saved our mission," he said. "I made mistakes during planning, and you covered for me during execution. Why didn't you throw me under the bus during the debrief?" Sarah looked at Peterson, recognizing an opportunity to address something that had been bothering her throughout third phase. "Peterson, we're going to be teammates throughout our careers. SEALs depend on each other in life and death situations. If I can't trust you to support me when I make mistakes, you can't trust me to support you when you need help. Peterson nodded slowly. Point taken. And, for what it's worth, I think you would have made a better team leader for this mission. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood with the remaining members of BUD/S Class 247 at their graduation ceremony. Of the 180 candidates who had started training, only 28 were receiving their SEAL qualification. Sarah was not just among them. She had graduated first in her class. Admiral Richardson, the senior naval officer presiding over the ceremony, spoke about the historic nature of the graduation. But, when he presented Sarah with her SEAL trident, his comments focused on her individual achievements rather than her gender. Petty Officer Martinez, you have demonstrated exceptional performance throughout one of the most demanding training programs in the U.S. military. Your technical competence, physical conditioning, and leadership potential represent the highest standards of the SEAL community. As Sarah felt the weight of the trident in her hands, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had grown up taking apart radios in East Los Angeles had become the first female Navy SEAL in history. But, more importantly, she had proven to herself that her capabilities were limited only by her willingness to test them. Standing there in the California sunshine, surrounded by her fellow graduates, and watched by millions of people around the world, Sarah realized that her real journey was just beginning. SEAL qualification was not a destination. It was preparation for challenges she could not yet imagine. She had broken every record that people said could not be broken. Now she needed to figure out how to use those achievements to accomplish something that mattered. Sarah's graduation from BUD/S made international headlines. But her real education was just beginning. SEAL qualification training would teach her how to apply the skills she had learned during BUD/S to actual special operations missions. More importantly, it would test her ability to perform as part of an operational team where her gender would be irrelevant, and her competence would be the only measure that mattered. SQT took place at an advanced training facility where candidates learned specialized skills including advanced weapons systems, close quarters combat, tactical medicine, and mission planning. The training was conducted by senior SEAL operators who had years of combat experience and little patience for candidates who couldn't perform at operational standards. Sarah's first challenge came during medical training, where candidates learned to provide emergency care under combat conditions. The course required students to perform complex medical procedures while being subjected to stress conditions that simulated battlefield environments. Martinez, you're the team medic, said Senior Chief Wilson during a training exercise. Rodriguez has a sucking chest wound and arterial bleeding in his leg. Johnson has a head injury and is unconscious. Patterson has a compound fracture of the femur. You have 2 minutes before enemy forces overrun your position. What are your priorities? Sarah assessed the scenario quickly, applying the same systematic approach she had used throughout her engineering education. She had 3 patients with different types of injuries requiring different interventions. She had limited time and resources. The key was optimizing treatment protocols to maximize survival rates while maintaining team mobility. Senior Chief Rodriguez gets a chest seal and tourniquet. That stops the immediate life threats, and he can continue fighting. Johnson gets airway management and a quick neurological assessment. If he's stable, he can be moved. Patterson gets pain management and splinting. The femur fracture isn't immediately life-threatening, but we'll need to plan extraction around his limited mobility. Time to completion? Senior Chief Wilson asked. 90 seconds for initial interventions, Senior Chief. During movement to extraction point, I continue monitoring and make adjustments based on patient status changes. Senior Chief Wilson nodded approvingly. Martinez, you're thinking like a combat medic. Most students focus on textbook protocols without considering operational constraints. That pattern repeated throughout SQT. Sarah's engineering background gave her advantages in understanding complex technical systems, while her BUD/S experience had taught her to apply that knowledge under pressure. But, more importantly, she was learning to think like a special operations professional rather than a student trying to meet training standards. During advanced weapons training, Sarah's performance surprised even seasoned instructors. Her marksmanship scores were exceptional, but her understanding of weapons systems mechanics allowed her to troubleshoot equipment problems that stumped other students. Martinez, this weapon is malfunctioning, said Master Chief Rodriguez, handing Sarah a rifle that had been deliberately sabotaged for training purposes. You have 5 minutes to diagnose and repair the problem under field conditions. Sarah examined the weapon systematically, applying diagnostic techniques similar to those she had used for mechanical systems in college. She identified the problem, a damaged firing pin spring, and implemented a field-expedient repair using components from another weapon. Master Chief, the weapon is operational, she reported after 3.5 minutes. Explain your diagnostic process, Master Chief Rodriguez requested. Sarah walked through her methodology, describing how she had systematically tested each component of the firing mechanism until she isolated the failure point. Her explanation demonstrated understanding that went beyond basic weapons maintenance to engineering-level systems analysis. Martinez, where did you learn to approach mechanical problems like that? Master Chief Rodriguez asked. Master Chief, I've been taking things apart and putting them back together since I was a child. Weapons systems aren't fundamentally different from any other mechanical device. They're just designed for a specific application. That conversation led to additional opportunities during SQT. Sarah was assigned to advanced technical training that prepared her for missions requiring specialized engineering expertise. She learned to assess and neutralize improvised explosive devices, to operate and maintain advanced communications equipment, and to conduct battlefield damage assessment of enemy technical capabilities. But the most significant part of Sarah's SQT experience was learning to work as part of an operational SEAL team. During training exercises, she was no longer a student being evaluated on individual performance. She was a team member whose competence directly affected mission success and teammate safety. Her first major team exercise was a simulated hostage rescue mission that required the team to infiltrate a defended building, locate and extract hostages, and eliminate enemy threats while minimizing civilian casualties. The exercise was designed to test every skill candidates had learned during their training, from underwater infiltration to close-quarters combat. Sarah's role was designated as Team Communications Specialist and Technical Support. But, as the mission unfolded, she found herself adapting to fill whatever roles the team needed most. During the infiltration phase, when the team's primary demolitions expert was designated as a casualty, Sarah took over explosive breaching operations. During the hostage location phase, when communications equipment failed, she diagnosed and repaired the problem while the team maintained security. During the extraction phase, when one of the rescued hostages was injured, she provided medical treatment while coordinating with extraction assets. After the exercise, the team leader, Lieutenant Commander Barnes, conducted a detailed evaluation of each team member's performance. Martinez, you were assigned specific technical roles for this mission, he said. But you ended up contributing across every aspect of the operation. Was that because other team members failed to perform their assigned duties? Sarah considered the question carefully. No, sir. Every team member performed their primary duties effectively. But, in dynamic situations, teams have to adapt to changing conditions. I contributed wherever additional capability was needed. Martinez, in your assessment, what determines team effectiveness during complex operations? Sir, I think team effectiveness depends on individual competence combined with adaptive capability. Everyone needs to be excellent at their primary responsibilities, but everyone also needs to be capable of supporting other team members when situations change. Lieutenant Commander Barnes made detailed notes about Sarah's performance and leadership philosophy. These evaluations would become part of the documentation used to assess women's integration into Special Operations Forces. But, for Sarah, the exercise had demonstrated something more significant than her ability to meet SEAL standards. Working as part of an elite team pursuing challenging missions felt like the natural application of everything she had learned throughout her life. The problem-solving skills she had developed in East Los Angeles, the analytical thinking she had refined at UCLA, and the leadership capabilities she had discovered during military training all combined into something greater than the sum of their parts. As SQT progressed, Sarah's reputation within the special operations community evolved. She was no longer seen as a historic first or a symbol of changing military policy. She had become recognized as an exceptional operator who brought unique capabilities to any team she joined. During the final phase of SQT, candidates were evaluated on their ability to plan and execute missions independently. Sarah's assignment was to develop a plan for destroying a high-value target in a defended area while maintaining plausible deniability about American involvement. The mission planning process required her to integrate intelligence analysis, technical assessment, resource allocation, risk management, and contingency planning into a comprehensive operational concept. It was essentially a complex engineering problem with life and death consequences. Sarah approached the assignment with the same systematic methodology she had used throughout her career. She analyzed the target's vulnerabilities from multiple perspectives, including structural engineering, electronic systems, and defensive capabilities. She developed multiple attack options and evaluated each one against criteria including probability of success, resource requirements, and political implications. Her final plan impressed the evaluation committee not just for its technical sophistication, but for its operational elegance. Sarah had identified an approach that would accomplish the mission objectives with minimal resources and maximum reliability while maintaining complete deniability. Martinez, this is one of the most sophisticated mission plans we've seen from a SQT candidate, said Captain Morrison, the senior evaluator. Walk us through your decision-making process. Sarah presented her analysis, explaining how she had balanced technical feasibility against operational constraints to develop an optimal solution. Her presentation demonstrated mastery of special operations planning methodologies combined with engineering principles that most operators never encounter. Martinez, do you see yourself as an engineer who became a SEAL, or as a SEAL who happens to have engineering background? Captain Morrison asked. Sarah considered the question. Sir, I think both perspectives are incomplete. I see myself as someone who uses whatever tools and knowledge are most effective for accomplishing missions that matter. Engineering training gave me certain analytical capabilities. SEAL training gave me certain operational capabilities. The combination creates possibilities that neither would provide independently. 3 months after beginning SQT, Sarah graduated with the highest marks in her class and qualification for assignment to an operational SEAL team. But her achievement was overshadowed by a conversation that would define the next phase of her career. Admiral Richardson, the senior naval special warfare officer, requested a private meeting with Sarah before her graduation ceremony. Martinez, your performance throughout SEAL training has been exceptional, he began. You've demonstrated capabilities that exceed our highest expectations, and you've shown that gender integration in special operations forces can be successful. Sarah listened carefully, sensing that Admiral Richardson was building towards something significant. Martinez, we're establishing a new unit that will focus on missions requiring advanced technical expertise. The unit will work on problems that conventional SEAL teams aren't equipped to handle. Things like advanced cyber warfare, weapons of mass destruction, and complex engineering challenges in denied areas. Admiral Richardson paused. We want you to be part of the founding team for this unit. You would help develop training standards, operational procedures, and mission capabilities that don't currently exist. The opportunity was extraordinary, but Sarah had learned to analyze decisions carefully before responding. Admiral, what would be the mission focus for this unit? Martinez, the threats we face are becoming more technically sophisticated. Enemy forces are using advanced technology, complex engineering systems, and innovative tactical approaches that require responses beyond traditional special operations capabilities. We need operators who can think like engineers while performing like SEALs. Sarah realized that Admiral Richardson was offering her the chance to help create something entirely new, a unit that would apply her unique combination of skills to challenges that no one had previously attempted. Admiral, would this unit focus on defensive or offensive capabilities? Both, Martinez. The mission would include everything from protecting critical infrastructure against technical attacks to conducting operations that require engineering solutions to tactical problems. As Sarah listened to Admiral Richardson's description, she understood that she was being offered the opportunity to help solve problems that truly mattered. The unit would work on challenges that could affect national security, save lives, and protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Admiral, I would be honored to contribute to this unit, she said. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a classified briefing room, looking at a diagram of a terrorist facility that conventional forces couldn't approach without triggering a weapon that would kill thousands of innocent people. The mission required someone who could understand complex technical systems, operate in extreme conditions, and develop solutions that had never been attempted before. As she studied the problem, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had grown up taking apart radios in East Los Angeles had become part of the most elite military unit in the world, working on problems that required every skill she had ever developed. She had proven that being underestimated was not a limitation. It was an advantage. She had shown that barriers were not permanent obstacles. They were temporary challenges waiting for creative solutions. Most importantly, she had demonstrated that excellence was not about meeting other people's expectations. It was about exceeding your own understanding of what was possible. Standing in that briefing room, preparing for a mission that would test every capability she had developed throughout her extraordinary journey, Sarah knew that her real story was just beginning. She had broken every record that people said couldn't be broken. Now she was ready to accomplish things that people hadn't even imagined were possible. The woman who had been dismissed and underestimated had not just proved everyone wrong. She had redefined what it meant to be exceptional.